Hey there, guys. This is Rita.
Hello, everyone. It's Amanda.
And you're listening to
I Don't Know Her. The podcast where we talk about women you've probably never heard of, but you should have.
And you will.
So we were talking about what to talk about today, and I have a story to tell Rita. I haven't told her yet.
Okay. Lay it on me.
So this week at our school, so I'm the advisor for the GSA.
Mm-hmm.
We're a gender and sexuality alliance, meaning we are for every gender on the spectrum, every sexuality on the spectrum is welcome to come join our club.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously our goal is to create a safer space for students who identify as LGBTQ+ to come out, to be themselves, to exist in our school.
Yeah, have a safe place to go and people to hang out with, and yeah.
And a lot of that means that we're working on educating and advocating for LGBTQ+ students among other students and in our staff. So this week, it was brought to my attention that a group of kids had started a petition to start a straight club.
Okay. You have a club. It's called society.
It's called the rest of the goddamn universe. And it reminded me of the fact that there, just like 2 weeks ago, was I think it was about 2 weeks ago, was a straight pride march in Boston.
Mm-hmm. I heard about that.
And the concept of straight pride is so bananas to me. Like, you can be straight and be happy at being straight and be proud of being straight. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But you don't need a parade. Nobody is trying to force you out of your home or your job or legislate against your marriage.
I was going to say, there's no legal humps that you have to fight over to be straight. You don't. Nobody asked me, was I born straight? Nobody. God, she looks straight.
Nobody ever has to come out as straight. You don't have to have a serious convo with your parents about, hey, this is who I am. And then have to worry about whether or not your parents disown you for
no one
your
loses family over being straight.
And technically, they are allowed to start their group, right? We have free speech in this country.
Yes, we do.
However, if they at any point in their creation of their club put it out there as exclusionary to other groups, that's when it'll get shut down.
Okay.
And
do you guys have a policy where everything has to be inclusive?
Yeah, well, it's against state law. You can't discriminate.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter if that's in work or in student organizations. You cannot discriminate against other people. It is in the Washington state law.
Yeah.
So that is, so as long as they're not saying gay people can't join, then they can have their club. However, we have a high school that's, a limited population. So we don't have 2 business clubs. We don't have 2 science clubs. We don't have 2 Spanish clubs.
Yeah. Because
they're competing for the same population of students, right? So with regards to the GSA, we already include straight people. We're already an organization that is about creating allyship and compassionate friendships, and we include everybody already. And we already have the goal of, recognizing everyone's gender and orientation. So they would be a competing club eventually, probably. What is their mission? What is their job?
That's what I was going to say. What is the mission of the club? What would be your, your statement of what is your goal? What are you trying to do?
Yeah.
Is it positive?
Well, and they're not going to actually follow through with it, because in order for them to be a real club, they have to, 1, find a faculty advisor.
Okay.
I can't, if some motherfucker signs on to do that, it's going to be an interesting staff meeting. 2, they have to then write a constitution.
Okay.
3, then they have to go to the ASB and ask to be included as an official club.
Okay.
They're not going to do that shit.
That's not going to happen.
They're not going to do all that shit. They're just not. And also, by the time they get to that point, people will have read through their constitution. And if it does say anything like, this is for straight people, this is for us to feel safe, does that mean that no one else can join? Because if so, then you can't exist because you're a discriminatory group. I just find the whole thing like bananas.
I feel it's very underhanded.
Well, it creates this like us against them mentality.
Yeah.
And we're not doing that. The GSA doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're actually like, I think it's this next week is Ally Week to celebrate the people who are not identified on the LGBTQ spectrum, but who want to show support and put themselves on the line.
Interesting.
For sure, right?
Yeah.
It's a concept I don't quite get. And right before we hit record, Rita was talking about having just watched.
It's the new Netflix special that Chelsea Handler just came out with. It's called Hi White Privilege. It's me, Chelsea. And it's a documentary about her quest of really digging in what is white privilege, what do white people think of it, and what do black people think of it. And she goes through and she interviews a lot of people, and she does this like really intense she has this intense conversation with her ex-boyfriend, which was one of her first boyfriends. She went on to a very successful career. He went to jail for 14 years. And it was a situation of he got caught. They both were together, and he got caught with drugs, and the police officer told her she could go and be like, oh, this girl got mixed up with the wrong person. And, you know, this black man goes to jail. So she talks with him about that experience and like what he went through being in the system and all that. And she was like, if I wasn't white, would I have gone to jail as well? And so that's real shit right there. That's like real life circumstances. And so she's really asking some really hard questions, and she's getting some hard answers back too. Like she was interviewing this group of young black people, and one girl told her, this young girl, she says, I almost feel embarrassed to be in this room with you. Yeah. Because she goes, I feel like you're taking just one more thing. And I mean, yeah.
So I haven't watched it yet, but I did listen to the podcast Keep It with Ira Madison III and Louis Vertel, which I really, really enjoy. If you are into pop culture, but you want like a more nuanced take on pop culture that's funny and comes from two gay men, one of whom is black and the other is white. It's a really fun show to listen to. And they interviewed her about this. And I had no idea that this was even coming out. And I just happened to listen to this podcast yesterday. And she talked about that scene. So I knew that scene happened. And I knew that the thing with the ex-boyfriend happened because of the interview. And it was interesting to hear her talk about it, because Ira asked her, well, when you decided to do this with this group, like when you included that moment in the documentary, was that intentional? You know, was that like, did you want that to be included? And she was like, honestly, I'm pretty comfortable being uncomfortable. That's like my deal. But she said it was really hard. Well, obviously it would be very hard, but she felt it was necessary to include. And her producer was the one who was like, oh, you dated a black guy when you were 16? Like, we definitely need to talk to that guy. Yeah. And she was like, no, I don't really want to do that. I'm not a real big fan of talking to my exes. Yeah. And she didn't know, I guess, prior to them like searching for him, that he had been incarcerated. Really? That like for like 14 years. Yeah. And she talked about how at the time when they were younger, because they had gotten in trouble three times together for pot possession, and all 3 times she'd been let go, and he was arrested all 3 times. And she said in the interview that when she was that age, she just didn't even consider that it was race that was playing a part. She said that she thought she was just like getting lucky, cute. Yeah. And getting lucky. And like, she thought maybe it was because she looked like a cute young girl. And that was just sort of luck on her part. And I just am like, I'm trying to think back to when I was 16 and whether or not I would have thought that.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I would have realized, fuck, this is because I'm getting off because I'm white.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I don't know if I would have understood it at 16 the way I understand it now.
Yep. It's definitely intense. I highly recommend it because it does bring a lot of stuff up to the surface, and even questions for myself and like how I participate in my society, and how I see and look at white people. And it can go from both sides. And she really does encourage an honest dialogue without turning to violence and without turning to automatically getting defensive about things, but like really like listening to each other as people. I was really surprised because I never thought she'd ever make something like this. I'm like, wow, it's kind of serious and it's really good.
I'm curious about that. You know, Chelsea doesn't have a great history, especially with issues on race, because she has said and done things that are pretty fucking racist.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I might watch it just to see, like, does she examine her own participation in those
and acknowledge it?
Yeah, in those situations, because she, in fact, Ira brought it up in the interview that I was listening to. He brought up like specific jokes that she had told in the past, and does she?
What did she say in the interview?
She said that she said basically that at the time she thought, well, this is okay, you know, because I have black friends. Like, I have black people who work for me. I hire black people to do this and that. And she was like, and then after the election, and I started to like really examine how I participated in this thing. She was like, then I started to really understand that maybe I shouldn't have told jokes like that.
Yeah.
And that I contributed to an issue that I didn't know I was
contributing to. People can always grow
to.
and learn, I think. And I think if people acknowledge their mistakes, people can change.
Yeah, I think that right now we have this tendency to be like, okay, well, that person said a racist thing, and now I can't listen to their music, or I can't watch them on television or whatever. And I think there's some validity in that, especially if you're a person of color and you just want to cut out that kind of shit in your life. Like, you have more license to do that than someone else. But I do think that if someone is willing to seriously do work and apologize and recognize that they're sort of participating and perpetuating a problem, I think that's okay. Like, I'm of the mindset that there is not a person in America who isn't a little racist, you know, and including myself. Even, you know, I can't remember who it was I was reading. There was a black woman I was reading, and she talked about how she did the thing that white women do once, where it was like a group of young black men who got on an elevator, and she gripped her purse tighter. And she was like, I judged men in my own culture that I know this is what other people, she was like, it was the internalized racism of what I was like, I had grown up seeing on news channels where they were calling them like animals and stuff like that. She was like, so even though like I logically understood and knew and like had already broken down in my head what institutional racism meant, I'm still having this reaction. And she was like, so, you know, it goes deeper than just what you know logically. And I too have had that same experience. Yeah. You know, where I've been like, I know, why am I like my first reaction before I think is something racist. Yeah. And then I have to sit down and unpack and examine that and go like, okay, so I had this thought. I can't unthink the thought. Yeah. How can I now address this thought in my own self and confront it, unpack it, figure out where did it come from? Was it based in reality, or was it based in some kind of
fear?
Yeah. Irrational fear that came from the way that we talk about a person of color in our country. And I think if you're not doing stuff like that, you're the problem. Yeah. Like those conservative white women that you're talking about in the thing where they're like, oh, well, people of color get everything. What?
Yeah. And Chelsea was like, what do they get? She was like, name it. If that's how you feel, name it. What is it? And one thing too that was brought up that I really like was like, she's like, okay, like I can see this white privilege. I can, like, if you acknowledge that, there is racism in this country, very, very heightened racism at the moment. She's like, okay, you're the ally now. You're the white person. You got a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. She's like, but now what? What are you going to do in your community?
Mm-hmm.
What are you going to do when you see something happening that shouldn't be happening? Like, we got to start doing something.
Mm-hmm. That's something I've been struggling with myself. And I have a tendency to think that like I have to take on the whole world and try to fix everybody. And that's just unrealistic. So what I've really been doing in the last few years is I'm a teacher. I work with students every day. The least I can do is try to make school safer.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we were earlier talking about the GSA and the straight pride group, I'm working very hard to make sure that the kids in our school who are LGBTQ plus feel like they have a space to go and that they have a system in place that will help them. And similarly, I've been trying to do the same when it comes to race issues in our school.
Mm-hmm.
So last spring, we did a big presentation for our principal on situations that we've seen. And I encouraged the kids to include information that wasn't just about sexuality and gender, but was about race, ability, mental illness, anything that they've heard where people have been othering another kid
Mm-hmm.
based on a perceived difference. And we've really been working very hard in the GSA to make sure that we're talking about intersectionality
Mm-hmm.
and how, our students who are in the GSA who have differing abilities or they have, they're different, like they're not white or they're different in some other perceived way.
Mm-hmm.
That has been, I think, really helpful. And I would love to have more time with them to really like break down and talk about like, it's okay to get things wrong. What's not okay is to not acknowledge it and try to change it in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the thing I can do. I can't do
it all.
I can't change everything. I can only just try to be better at being myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then also be better at school and and it's unfortunately like I'm realizing that because I've done this stuff now, I've really like put myself out there. I feel like I'm always a target and that's been hard,
Mm-hmm.
but also I'd rather it be me.
Yeah.
And I'd rather there actually be someone.
Yeah, I agree. Let's change the world little by little.
And we're doing the podcast. I mean, it's got like that's one of the reasons I wanted to do the podcast.
Yeah.
Like, let's put some positive things out into the world, but also talk honestly about the problems.
Yeah. Nice. That's some heavy stuff.
I know it was really heavy.
Really heavy stuff.
Well, the woman I'm talking about today is very, very fun. For the most part. However, I'm gonna have to like go into hiding after this.
Do you want to go first?
What do you got? What's your kind of story?
Mine is she's got a little bit of a hard life. She's a traveler and she accomplishes something. She's a late bloomer later on in her life.
Let's start with yours.
All righty. So this lady that I picked, she is half Mexican, half American. And
White American?
It is, yes.
Okay.
It is a Hispanic Heritage Month starting September. So I wanted to start this with somebody I can identify with.
Woo woo.
Yeah. So the woman I'm going to talk about today is Ynes Mexía.
I don't know her.
Right. She is a Mexican-American botanist, a traveler, and one of the most accomplished plant collectors of her generation.
This is going to be real interesting. She said botanist, and my eyebrows just about went into the ceiling because I was like, what?
I thought you would like this. So Ynes was born in Washington, D.C. on May 24th, 1870.
Whoa.
Yes.
I was expecting way more modern.
No.
Okay.
So her father, Enrique Mexía was actually a Mexican diplomat. And he was here in the States when he met her mother. She's an American from Maryland named Sarah. When her parents met, her mother already had a previous marriage, and she had 6 kids from that marriage.
Whoa.
So she met him, and they had, they had Ynes. So then she had a total of 7.
Okay, they just had the one?
They just had the one together.
Okay. I thought you were going to tell me. And then they had 6 more children. And I was going to be like, okay, people, we are not puppies. We do not have litters.
So her grandfather had been the founder of Mexico's Federalist Party, and the Mejías had property in Mexico, and a town in Texas called Limestone County was Mexía family land. And the town actually still bears the name. So when Ynes was 3 years old, her parents' marriage fell apart, and her father moved back to Mexico, and her mother took the children, including Ynes, and she lived on the family-owned property in Texas. So there's varying accounts of her young adult life and her childhood. One thing I found that was a constant stream with all of it was that her parents' marriage was terrible.
Oh,
and her
no.
parents' relationship with each other was very devastating for her. She had a very hard upbringing with the two, being kind of caught in between the two of them. So Ynes spent most of her childhood in Texas. She attended multiple private schools. She went to one in Philadelphia. I know.
From Texas
From
to Philadelphia?
Texas to Philadelphia. It was a private Quaker
Oh, the Quakers?
school.
They kind of got it right. The Quakers were pretty good about shit.
So then she ended up attending another one in Ontario, Canada. Yeah.
She's just getting farther and farther away.
Farther away from her mother and her father.
So are these, I'm assuming they're boarding school.
They are boarding schools,
Yeah.
yes. And so when she was 15, she enrolled in the St. Joseph Academy in Emmitsburg, Maryland, back where her mother is from. And after she finished there, her father fell ill, and she decided to go and move to Mexico to take care of her dad. And she would bounce back and forth between seeing her mother. She'd go and see her father. And it almost seemed like her father had no one else. And so she felt obligated to take care of him. So going back and forth, and she's from this broken home, Ynes admitted that her life was defined by isolation and loneliness. She would find joy by going for long walks by herself in the countryside. She liked spotting birds and inspecting plants. She was a spiritual person, and she told her father that she was thinking of entering a convent. And her father was adamantly against it.
Well, I wonder why.
And he said that he wanted her to marry. He wanted her to have a family. And so he put it, her father had a lot of money. And so he put in his will a stipulation that if she went into the convent, she would be disinherited.
What the fuck?
Yeah. So like
That's
she
pretty
had
drastic.
no option.
So the whole like, my life is really shitty and chaotic, so I'm going to go take a walk in the woods.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like Grandma Gatewood.
I immediately thought of that, of finding your serenity in your surroundings. So she takes care of her father until he dies in 1896. She becomes emotionally overwhelmed when she gets this bombshell. She ends up having to be in court to battle for her father's estate because apparently he had a mistress when he was with her mother.
Oh, fuck.
And
they
that
had kids?
mistress had a son.
Oh.
And so this woman comes out with this boy, and she's like, this is actually the rightful heir to Mexía's estate. So she has to battle for this
Wouldn't
money.
they both be the heirs, though?
Yeah, but
like
technically she wasn't legally married to him, so she has no legal right to his home and his money.
No, but the kid does.
The kid does.
Yeah, but what I mean is, like, he has Inez,
Mm-hmm.
or you said Inez?
Yes.
And then the boy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so really they're, like, the other mother cannot argue that her son is the rightful heir. They both are the rightful heirs.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to split it.
Well, she got the estate. She said it was embarrassing. It was a tedious court battle.
And what year is this happening?
This is happening in 1896.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah.
That would be very embarrassing.
Inez is about 24, 25 at this time.
I mean, it would be embarrassing now. Can you imagine if this happened right now? Like your dad dies and you all find out that he had a mistress and had a kid with them?
That's what I'm wondering if the mom knew.
Do you know that happened to me?
What?
Yeah. So when my dad died, so I was raised by my stepfather, so I call him my dad, although I occasionally like change that nomenclature up.
Mm-hmm.
But after he died, I was hanging out with my stepbrother, and my stepbrother is a mess of a human being, and he was like always getting drunk and whatever. And so we're hanging out drinking in his garage, and he just goes, you know, he's got another kid.
Oh my God.
And I was like, what? He's like, yeah, he's got another kid in Canada.
What the? Oh, is that your?
I have no idea.
Oh, you don't know?
I don't even know if he just came up with that, but it sounded like he did some investigation and actually met this person and knows that it's his sibling. And
my mouth is wide open.
The family has never talked about it.
Wow.
I didn't even tell my mom because my mom was my stepfather's mistress.
Oh shit.
Mm-hmm. And I found that out because my mom is a fucking weirdo who used to record her phone conversations, and I found the cassette tapes and started listening to them when I was like 12. And I found the one where
God.
I found the one where they're on the phone together and he's talking to my mom and they're having like lovey-dovey talk, and then all of a sudden there's another woman's voice in the background, and he starts talking to my mom about pipe fittings and furnace repairs.
Oh.
And then he whispers,
that's some shady ass shit.
And then he whispers, okay, she's gone.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So, I mean, who knows?
I just had another friend fact that I didn't know.
He could have had many mistresses over the years, and I have no idea.
Wow.
Yeah. So I didn't know until he died. I mean, my stepbrother is very convinced that he has another child and they live in Canada.
Wow. That is crazy.
Yeah, no.
I don't know what to do with that. Okay, back to you, Inez.
Me neither.
So yeah, that shit happened to her, and she was able to get the estate. So after her father's death, after the court battle, she's about 28 years old, which is fairly late 20s. She's getting older.
Getting her life together.
She decides to get married. She met this man, Herman de Lau. He was a Spanish-German merchant, which he just sounds beautiful, Spanish and German.
Isn't that what Nick is?
He's Spanish and Norwegian.
Oh, yeah, Spanish and Norwegian.
But a few years into the marriage, he dies.
Of what?
It didn't say what he died of.
I mean, it's like the early 1900s.
Yeah, so he might have gotten a cold and
dysentery.
It just killed him.
Were they on the Oregon Trail?
You got dysentery. Now you're dead. She's devastated.
Yeah.
She just lost her father. She had to do this really strenuous court battle. She meets this guy and was like, cool, maybe life will start, looking a little brighter. And then he dies.
Oh my God.
So a few years later, she marries again. And this time it's Agustin Regados. He's 16 years her junior.
I'm always surprised when that happens, when it's like an older, like in the late 1890s, early 1900s. I'm always surprised by that. Like, wow.
What did you have? What did you got going on?
I mean, you must have you got that good skin.
And like a lot of the people around her was like, this is a bad idea. This guy is not good. Apparently he was shady. He was kind of a sweet talker. And
he's after that money.
Fell
that
hook,
land.
line, and sinker. Yeah. So the marriage was really rocky. He actually mismanaged a lot of her money. So yeah, there was that. Inez ended up having a mental and physical breakdown.
Oh.
She decides to move to San Francisco, and she's seeking medical care. She's going to, not an asylum, but where people go to like rest and recuperate. What do they call those? Like a
retreat.
Yeah, basically.
Spa.
Something like that. But she's getting medical attention as well. Her second husband stays in Mexico and doesn't come with her. And so they eventually, like, their shit gets really bad and they separate and they eventually divorce. And then he dies. So I'm like, was she putting something in the water? Was she just getting rid of her husband?
Maybe the other story is she's a goddamn serial killer.
So while she's in San Francisco, part of her healing process was to go on excursions into the mountains of Northern California with this hiking group called the Sierra Club.
Oh, I love the Sierra Club.
I never heard of it.
They have a really great website where you can buy discounted outdoor gear.
Oh, nice. I have to check that out. So she's going with this hiking group and she just falls in love with the redwoods. Like that forest is beautiful.
It's on my list.
I've been there. It's gorgeous. It's breathtaking. Like just to stand amidst those enormous trees. It's awesome. She found her peace and joy again. She said, with the birds, with the plants, and with the quiet. After recouping, she decides to go into social work and she finds a purpose with like helping disadvantaged people. And she enrolls in the University of California at Berkeley. And she wants to further her education in social work. And her hiking club was like, oh, they've got like some cool botany courses. You really like looking at the plants while we're walking. Why don't you take a botany course? And she's like, oh, that'd be kind of fun. And so she takes this course and she joins an expedition led by E.L. Furlong, who was the Berkeley paleontologist there. And she was just like, oh my God, I love this class.
He was a paleontologist?
Yes.
But she's in a botany course?
Did I write down the wrong word? Because paleontology is
fossils.
Fossils. Mm.
You also earlier said recouping, and I was like, nope, she means recuperating.
Oh, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. Well, so she goes on this expedition led by E.L. Furlong, who's a teacher at Berkeley.
There you go. Fix it.
She loved it so much. She enrolls in a course on flowering plants at the Hopkins Marine Station in Pacific Grove in California. After that course, she decides, this is what I want to do. So bye social work. Hello, plants.
You know what? Plants can't talk back to you.
So in the company of a botanist from Stanford University, her name was Roxana Ferris, which I really like that name.
Yeah.
Roxana Ferris.
Yeah, she sounds like a rock star.
She does. The rock star of the plant world. So Ynes, she makes her first trip to go to Mexico to categorize plants. So once in Mexico, Ynes decided that she could accomplish a lot more on her own. And she abandoned the group and did her own thing. She's like, I got my pack, I got my stuff. I learned how to preserve these plants. I'm going to go this way now.
Okay.
She was braving treacherous landscapes. She had a pack horse, which one time rolled over.
Oh,
so
no.
It's pretty dangerous, like going in remote places trying to find stuff that people haven't seen before.
Yeah.
She's jumping in between rocks and cliffs. She's exploring, collecting. She said all in all, she was enjoying the quiet. One of the trips nearest to her heart was she did a 3,000-mile excursion up the Amazon River in just a canoe.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
The creatures that you would encounter.
The danger, the sicknesses.
Oh.
She did eat one time. She ate these berries and she got like the shits for like a few days. She got so sick.
She's lucky that she didn't die.
Exactly. She made many expeditions during the next 12 years of her life. She was frequently traveling alone, something that was very uncommon for her age and because she was a woman. And she said she also suffered prejudice largely from the white males that were in her field because she was mixed race.
Yeah, and a woman. Yeah, that's that intersectionality we were talking about earlier where you have layers and layers of shit to deal with instead of just one.
So even though she's facing prejudice, she is an older woman. She's not letting that stop her. She ends up traveling to Alaska. She goes to Argentina. She goes to Brazil, to Chile, to Ecuador, to Peru. Over her career, she ends up picking up 150,000 samples of plants and flora and different bacteria that grow in the water.
That's incredible.
She discovered 2 new genus of plants, the Mehianthus and the Spalula. I looked up both the plants. One of them's like all these little yellow dots on a leaf. It's like this little fungus that grows. And then the one that's Mehianthus, it's like a tall, very thin leaves and stems with like little tiny yellow buds on the end.
And that's obviously named after her.
Yes. So, and she cataloged about 500 new species.
That's really cool.
Very. And 50 of them are named after her in different varying ways. One flowering plant called the Mimosa Mexía was the first species to bear her name, which was very rewarding for her because she broke her hand and several ribs falling off a cliffside to get it.
Yeah, I would have been like, the least you can do is name this goddamn plant after me. It tried to kill me.
Mm-hmm. This is a quote from her. She wrote, the hiking club that she was part of had a newsletter. And so she would often write letters and send it to the newsletter so that she could share with her friends of what she was finding. And so this is a part of one of those newsletter letters. I photographed the great spath and flower clusters, so heavy that 2 men could hardly lift it. I made measurements and notes, and I took portions of great arching fronds. Then I started the long journey back, arriving after dark, very tired, very hot, very dirty, and very happy. I can just picture her out there just on her own, getting her plants, loving life, and just being happy and excited with what completes her.
Doesn't that sound ideal?
Yes. Maybe that's why I'm like just in love with this. I'm like, I want to go do this.
But you can.
Yeah.
Go to the community college and take some courses and then become a botanist.
There you go. So even though she never completes her degree, she was too busy doing the job that she's a celebrated botanist. She actually was invited and asked to lecture frequently in the Bay Area. She published mostly all of her accounts of her adventures and a variety of environmental periodicals. What is a periodical?
It's just magazines and stuff like that, journals.
All right. I knew you would know that word.
I am a librarian.
In 1938, during an expedition in Mexico, she becomes really sick and she gets really weak. She doesn't know what's going on. She tries to keep on traveling, but she eventually returns to the U.S. And it turns out she was diagnosed with lung cancer.
Oh, no.
And she died within a month of her diagnosis.
You know, in some ways that's good.
Yeah. Lung cancer
it's real bad.
It's bad. And she was 68 years old at this time. Ynes left much of her estate to the Save the Redwoods Fund. And she left a lot of her estate to her beloved Sierra Club. William E. Colby, who's the secretary of the Sierra Club at the time of her death, he wrote this in a dedication letter that was published in the Sierra Club newsletter. He said, all who knew Ynes Mexía could not fail to be impressed by her friendly and unassuming spirit, and by that rare courage which enabled her to travel, much of the time alone, in lands where few would dare to follow.
Nice.
I thought that was very sweet. Her records, her plants, her catalog can be found in, this is a list.
Okay.
California Academy of Sciences, the Academy of Natural Sciences, the Catholic University, and the Field Museum of Natural History, the Gray Herbarium.
Herbarium?
Well,
if you're British, it's a herbarium.
Harvard University, Berkeley, Botanical Gardens in London, in Copenhagen, in Geneva, in Paris, in Stockholm, and in Zurich. Her work is worldwide.
That's incredible.
Her personal papers from her travels and her personal journals are held in the California Academy of Sciences and at the Bancroft Library in UC Berkeley. It's also available online if you want to take a look.
Where at?
It's the UC Berkeley website.
Okay.
And everything that she found and cataloged, people are still referencing it today, and they still use it today. So she made an incredible impact for science.
On the world, yeah.
Yeah. So my information that I found was from Wikipedia, encyclopedia.com, encyclopediabritannica.com, UC Berkeley website, a really cute article called Late Bloomer, The Short Prolific Career of Ynes Mexía by Elizabeth Kiernan. I went to Outside Online.
I love them.
And today she is actually being featured as the Google Doodle.
Today?
And today marks the day where she took her first hike with the Sierra Club.
So FYI people, that means September 15th.
September 15th.
So that's when, by the time you listen to this, she will no longer be the Google Doodle.
Yes.
Oh my God, I cannot believe I said that correctly.
Google Doodle.
On the first try.
Yes.
You know, Abby is a member of the Sierra Club.
She is?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. See, in this,
or was. I think she let her membership expire the last year.
Her love of nature and adventure, and also education, it reminded me of Abby.
Yeah, it reminds me of her too.
Yeah.
So my wife has her degree in environmental education, and she would teach kids about plants and birds and trails and erosion and things like that. And now she works construction as a handy lady, but her heart lies in the outdoors.
Get her around a bird book with some binoculars, or just sometimes I'll be talking to her and her eyes will just dart and she's like, that's a la 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 la. I'm like, okay.
A red-winged blackbird. And you're like, cool. Yeah, last night we're watching this horrible movie because we're going to go to How Did This Get Made live. And she was like, that's a kestrel. Everybody here, that's a kestrel.
I absolutely love that about her. It's so endearing. I love it.
At the end of the movie, there's a whole avian attack. Guys, I don't know what to tell you. It's a weird movie. And instead of a kestrel, suddenly there is a different hawk. And I was like, oh, is that a Harris hawk? And she's like, no, that's a red tail. It's a red tail hawk.
Oh, I love it.
Are you ready for a completely different idea?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to talk about Susie Bright.
I don't know her.
She is a pioneering sex-positive queer feminist writer and sexpert.
Ooh.
I know. We're going to get a little racy.
Okay. My belly feels weird.
It's going to get real weird.
Okay.
So Susanna Bright was born March 25th, 1958 in Arlington, Virginia, to parents William and Elizabeth Bright. Her father was a linguist who worked as a professor at UCLA, and her mother was a teacher and librarian.
Oh.
I know.
What does that sound like?
Her parents were involved in liberal politics when she was young. And so this is the 60s when she's little. And her mom was really interested in the feminist movement and brought Susie to see feminist talks. And she even got to see Gloria Steinem when she was really young.
Ooh.
And that sort of planted the seed for what would later become her radical feminism. Her parents divorced when she was young, and she spent her formative years living with her mom. But based on what I could figure out from research, she's obviously still alive.
Mm.
And I was reading interview after interview after interview of her talking, and she doesn't really go into detail about her young life. And I'm sure she does in her book, which I haven't read, but I plan to. But they must have moved around a lot, because she talks about having lived in the Midwest, Edmonton, Canada, and a lot of other places. But for the most part, most of the large events that I'm going to talk about, they took place in California.
Okay.
So that's where I'm going to kind of focus.
Crazy that both of our ladies moved around and then they both ended up in California.
Well, and something else that was weird. So she wrote a book on motherhood later on, and I was reading an interview when that book was coming out, and she was talking about motherhood. And so then obviously is talking about her own mother and her relationship with her mom. And she said this really weird thing. She had been talking about how her mother was raised by a mom who didn't tell her anything. And so the first time she got her period, she was terrified.
Yeah. Just how most girls, honestly.
Mm-hmm. So when Susie was getting her first, around the age that she would have been getting her first period, her mom gave her pamphlets and books about it, but still didn't talk to her about it. Just wanted her to know what it was. So there's this progression that's happening, but not all the way.
Mm-hmm.
And so Susie says that when she was 13, her mother sent her away. and that she didn't realize that she was never coming back.
What the hell?
So I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know if she went away to boarding school and like whatever, but she said like her mom had never, that her grandmother did the same thing to her mom, basically. So that's what she knew how to do. So like in her most vulnerable years as a teenage girl, she didn't have her mother.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it, again, didn't go into detail, so I don't know exactly what that means.
My mother wanted to send me away when I was 13.
I know I was a bitch. It was awful. So she ends up attending high school at West LA's University High School, where she has her first brush with public notoriety.
Mm-hmm.
She was already a budding activist and was an activist in her high school. And she was part of this group of students who were writing and producing a Marxist revolutionary newspaper.
Whoa.
Called the Red Tide. So they had a student newspaper in this high school, but they had this Marxist newspaper that they were writing and creating on their own. And the school district didn't want to publish this paper and wanted to prevent its distribution. So the students sued the school district in 1974 when Susie is 16 years old.
Oh, whoa.
She's part of this lawsuit suing the school. And the students eventually won the lawsuit 2 years later, which was a decision that would end up impacting how schools treat students' rights to free speech for the rest of time. So she, but by this time she's 18, she's headed off to college.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes to Cal State Long Beach and then transfers to UC Santa Cruz, where she majors in theater and women's studies, which is like, I wish I had done that. She was already at this time openly bisexual. And it is the mid-70s.
Oh, wow.
Right?
I know it was not that long ago, but it was that long ago.
It was.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're still in a time when it's illegal to be gay.
Yeah.
So she said, though, in interviews that it wasn't really a big deal to those in her intimate life. Like her parents, she said that her parents had more gay and bi friends than she did.
Oh, wow.
And no one really in her immediate surroundings thought it was unusual or immoral or whatever. But she understood that at the larger society level, yes, she was considered this weirdo, right?
Mm-hmm.
So she was part of this counterculture and was obviously a feminist, right? Because she'd already kind of done some of this work. But she was already developing this distaste for what was mainstream feminism because they had this really sexually repressive side of the feminist movement, particularly the lesbian and queer side of feminism.
Okay.
In fact, she talked about once that her and her friends were organizing a Take Back the Night march in Northern California. Do you know what those are?
It's for safety in like parks and campuses. Is that
It's like anti-violence against women, anti-rape. I actually did the exact same thing she did. I helped organize and participated in Take Back the Night marches and rallies and spoke at them.
Nice.
So like there's a lot of parallels in her thing that I'm like, whoa. So she's the goal of these marches is and in this one in particular was they went to a really like what was a quote unquote a bad neighborhood to highlight the impact that violence has on women in particular, and that nighttime is an unsafe time for women.
Yeah.
That we don't have the ability to walk at night and feel safe in our bodies.
Yeah.
So at the rally, again, they're supposed to be highlighting street violence, domestic violence against women. At the rally, a woman holds up a pornographic photo that she'd taken from the library and then sets it on fire.
Okay.
And everybody's like, the crowd goes wild. They're so excited. And she's like, what? So she said this. I remember this little voice in me, the voice of a librarian's daughter saying, you shouldn't destroy anything in the library.
Oh my God. That is so awesome.
But she was also looking at this picture like, why are you destroying the picture? So she starts to dig deeper into what was then the current feminist ideology, which had carried over from the 60s to the 70s. So first, just like we're going to do a little feminism 101 real quick. First wave feminism were like the suffragists and stuff that were trying to get women the right to vote and the women the right to get divorced and own property and things like that. Second wave feminism was the people in the 60s and 70s and whatever who were trying to get like equal pay, jobs, just more equal access to society, to be, less subjected to rape. And so she's looking at these women and this second wave feminism. And there was a lot more for her to dislike, that she felt like this is good and well, but you have this whole part that you're not getting right.
Yeah.
So she said this about the perception of what women's sexuality, specifically lesbianism, was treated by feminists at the time. We hold hands. We talk about peace and environmentalism. Then I bring you to orgasm. You bring me to orgasm simultaneously. But there's no penetration, and we don't look at each other's bodies. We just look into each other's eyes. Because if I looked at your body, that would be demeaning you and objectifying you. And it was on and on and on, a very unrealistic idea of how to relate sexually. Because in this sort of what were then radical feminists of like the 70s, they wanted to stop the objectification of women. So in order to do so, you needed to get rid of all images that portrayed women as objects. So this time in American culture, and specifically among feminists, is called the sex wars.
Whoa.
Are you familiar with that?
No.
So I'm going to, again, it's a really complex topic, but I'm just going to distill it as fine as I can. The sex wars were really about this complex set of divisions within feminists about sex and pornography. Many groups that were within the feminist movement believed fundamentally that pornography was solely about the subjugation of women, and as long as it existed, women would be subjugated. So they would need to get rid of all porn.
Okay.
It needed to be eradicated from society in order for women to truly ever be seen as equal.
What about the male porn? Does that stay?
I guess.
Okay.
As long as there were women in it, it was
fine.
okay.
Okay.
And they were actually, some of these groups were explicitly working to make it illegal. Like they had actually partnered up, some of them, with because this was also the rise of the right wing. This is the rise of that Christian conservatism. It's happening at the same time. And now we have these strange bedfellows where we've got these radical feminists who think porn should be outlawed. And then we've got these crazy right-wingers who also think porn should be outlawed. So they're working together.
Crazy.
It is very weird. On the other side of the coin were women like Susie and activists and feminists and all kinds of sexualities who believed that porn itself wasn't the problem. It was not the image of two people having sex or of multiple people having sex, or it was that, that sexual desire itself is good and it's natural, and that you could be into things like SM and bondage and leather and still be practicing feminism.
Yeah.
So there was nowhere more divided than in specifically queer women's feminism, because lesbians had gone through this whole process where they, as a group, sort of intentionally desexualized themselves in order to be a political identity rather than a sexual identity.
Okay.
And that still carries on there. There's still remnants of that.
Yeah.
Of this image of sexless lesbians who raise cats.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely.
And there was a good reason for that, because a lot of porn, and even still a lot of porn today, that depicts lesbian sex, and I use that term extremely loosely and in quotes.
She's using quotations.
are really just for the straight male gaze.
Yeah.
And they're created by the straight males. They're for the straight males. These are not for us.
Yeah.
And that had created this really hyper-sexualized ideal of a lesbian. And so in order to divorce themselves from that, they went the opposite direction and become these sexless.
It's the too far to the right and too far to the left. It's not that happy medium.
And so Susie not only doesn't agree with this idea wise, but her own life is very adventurous. She has sex with men and with women, and she has multiple partners at the same time. She was not a monogamous person and still is not a monogamous person. She was openly queer, and she wasn't alone. She was surrounded by her friends and the group of people like her who felt the same way. And they started to wonder, like, why aren't we being portrayed anywhere? Where are we?
Yeah.
We're invisible.
Yeah. They're the others at that moment.
So she starts to talk about sex openly. She joined a performance art group called the Mainstream Exiles. And they would go and they would do like art shows and performances and whatever. And this attracted the attention of a woman named Joni Blank. She was a sex educator, author, and publisher who started a store called Good Vibrations.
I've heard of that store.
Yeah.
I've been in that store.
It was one of the first woman-owned sex toy shops in the country. And it was in San Francisco.
Nice.
And so Joni saw Susie and the Mainstream Exiles, and she hired Susie to work at the store in 1981.
That's cool.
At that time, there were only 3 employees, including Susie, and they just sold a few vibrators and some lube, you know, and they were really just sort of marketing to women and trying to get women to be more open and interested in sexuality.
Yeah.
Their own sexuality. And Susie often said that because they didn't have very many customers back in the day, she often had loads of time to talk to the customers who came in. So these women would come in, and she said that a lot of them would come in like super downtrodden.
Aww.
And so she would just sort of ask them questions and listen to them and give them advice.
It's a hard place to be too, especially if you're walking in somewhere like that. I'm sure they've never been in a store like that before. You're vulnerable, and talking to another woman, I would feel comfortable, but this is now. It's not back then.
Well, and she said in an interview that at the beginning, most of the women who were walking in were being sent there by male therapists and doctors.
Why?
To cure them of like their repression.
Okay.
That there was something wrong with them.
Yeah.
And so she would sit and talk to them and talk about, let's talk about this, let's talk about that. She has this really great quote, which I didn't include, and I kind of regret, because later on in life, somebody's like, does your work still matter? Like, because she works in sex education basically her whole life. They're like, does your work still matter? Like, we all are like way more advanced in our thinking. And she was like, do you know a man who doesn't know where his penis is? She was like, because I still have women who have no idea where their clitoris is.
Wow.
And that's basically what she's talking to these women about, is like the myth of like the penetrative orgasm. So she's like showing them how to pleasure themselves so that they can enjoy themselves more. She was really, really like progressive. So
it's almost like she was the therapist.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they're being sent there by these male therapists who basically say there's
obviously
something
don't
wrong.
know what the fuck they're.
Yeah, they probably don't know where the clitoris is either. Let's be honest. And she had actually been trained at the time by this group called the San Francisco Sex Information, and they worked to advise people about human sexuality. So Good Vibration starts to pick up business. They're becoming more popular, and they have this idea, let's start a mail order catalog. And so Susie, so it would have the catalog of their products, but it would also include advice, erotica, things like that. So Susie started writing about sex in it, and she would write from a woman's point of view directed at women, which had basically never been heard of.
Yeah.
And she ended up becoming the manager of Good Vibrations, which really put her on the map in the sex positive queer scene, which was basically a term she coined, sex positive. It wasn't really popular then.
Wow, that's really cool.
And she was approached by 2 women who were very similar to her, Nan Kinney and Debbie Sundahl. And they were like, you know what's not out there? A lesbian sex magazine.
Oh.
We have Playboy and Hustler and blah, 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 blah. And there are gay male magazines. There's nothing for lesbians. So they decided to start one. And they called it On Our Backs.
That is fucking legit.
Oh, it gets better. So the title of their magazine, On Our Backs, is actually a riff on a really well-known feminist newspaper at the time that was called Off Our Backs. And that immediately put them at odds, right? Like the Off Our Backs people were so pissed.
What? Oh my gosh.
Mhm.
Okay.
Because the whole, again, this sex war, right?
Forgot about the sex war. Okay.
Yes. The Off Our Backs people are like, we need to move women away from being sexual objects and all about their like, you're just a hole, basically, this idea.
Mm-hmm.
And they felt like this On Our Backs was trying to do the opposite. And the magazine did not shy away from anything.
Really?
So you remember when I went to Pride in June?
Yes.
So I went to the Leslie Lohman Museum, which is a queer LGBTQ museum. And they had a whole section on lesbian pornography, basically, or lesbian sexuality. I can't remember what the room was, but I looked at some of the original photographs that were On Our Backs.
Mm-hmm.
And they were great. I put some of them in my story on Instagram, and Instagram removed my story.
Okay, so those were the...
Yeah.
Okay, I saw those, yeah.
So here's just a sampling of the kind of things they had in there. Images of girl gang sex, leather girls, fisting, butches, femmes, trans and intersex folks, and a lot more. And Susie and her friends who started this magazine, they saw a need and they wanted to fill it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to actually play a quote where she talks about what was going on in the zeitgeist at the time, like the society at large, and especially in like these feminist and queer communities. And so why she felt the need to do this.
So everything was going along very nicely. But then when we started to talk about what was above the neck and the kind of things you might think about sex, your desires, your fantasies, the way you imagined yourself, your erotic identity, your sexual philosophy, all of that is very psychological, it's deep, it's highly individual and idiosyncratic and imaginative. And that's when there started to be these fissures between people like myself who was saying imagination good, freedom of expression, it doesn't hurt you to think about this. Prudery kills, but nobody ever dropped dead from, seeing a sexual idea in print or hearing one. I always was emphasizing that. I would say, so how many people died because they saw a naked picture? Please, show me the corpses littered on the floor. You might say, I don't like that, or it offended me, or it's not my thing, or you might feel deeply moved and not even know why. But nevertheless, it is part of your education and your history. For others who said, no, this stuff has to be clamped down. Susie and her books and her magazines and all this stuff she's doing. On Our Backs just wasn't a lesbian magazine. We didn't realize this, but it was the first women-run, women-staffed, female contributor magazine about sex, period. Period. To this day, I'm like, so where is the hot magazine for women who really love men? Where's that? Even On Our Backs did a little bit of it, just because we were like, somebody's got to do something.
She's very pretty. She's quite striking.
She is. And she speaks so well and in like an approachable way about it.
She's very commanding presence.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like you just want to watch her.
Yeah, exactly. Oh no.
So in the magazine, Susie started writing a sex column, an advice column, and under the name Susie SEXPERT.
That's a good one. And
that would launch a career that she carries on to this day. And in 1990, she collected these columns into her first book, which was called Susie SEXPERT's Lesbian Sex World.
Say that 5 times fast.
I know. Susie SEXPERT's Lesbian Sex World. On Our Backs incorporated erotica as well in there. So that's like stories,
I'm a fan.
Yeah. They're great.
They are. I used to read so many of those when I was a teenager. I was like, oh my God.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, when I was coming out, like when I was in that mindset of, I would read that stuff and I would just be like, oh my God. It was like my world opened up. I had no idea. So On Our Backs had this erotica in there, right? So in 1985, and they had erotic photography. They had erotica stories. So the two other owners in the magazine, Sundal and Kinney, they decided, we need to branch out even further. Let's start our own erotic videos.
Wow. I like that it's a little something for everybody, because people have so many different buttons. It's like, this is kind of a full circle, very inclusive way to be sexual. I like it.
So they started Fatale Video. And the response to the erotica, or aimed specifically at women, was tremendous. So Susie was like, why don't we publish the erotica, like, by itself as its own entity? So she published the first volume of women's erotica in 1988 called Herotica. And eventually Herotica led Susie to be the editor of The Best American Erotica, which was an anthology published every year from 1993 until 2008. And she was the editor-in-chief every issue, or every anthology. In 1986, Susie was invited, this is bananas, she was invited to begin reviewing pornographic films, like a film critic.
Really?
For Penthouse.
Okay.
And this was like the first time this had ever happened in the porn industry. There was nobody out there writing reviews of pornographic films, because
there just kind of wasn't done.
Yeah. There was this perception that porn was just for one purpose and one purpose only. So who cared about production values or acting or storylines? So she started doing that. She started critiquing the films that were coming out. And if it was a bad film, she would tell you it was a bad film. Like, if you want to see something that's believable, don't look at this one. It's going to be hard for you to get. You're going to want to fast forward.
So terrible.
And then she would praise the ones that had better production value. The sound was good. There was no weird dubbing. And this sort of started changing the whole porn industry and raising the bar for what would be considered good porn. And she also, because she's this feminist sexpert from a queer woman's perspective, would really analyze and critique what she would see as perhaps bad for women or anti-queer, and talk about that. And that really also helped change the way the porn was being made. By 1990, during the 1980s, Susie's primary partner was a woman named Honey Lee Cottrell, who was a photographer and filmmaker who also worked in queer sex. And she was like super groundbreaking in her own right. I like looked at her photos when I was in New York. So I knew who she was because I remembered seeing her name. And so at some point, maybe she'll get her own episode, because she had her own incredible career.
Yeah.
By 1993, however, Susie had started seeing a man who was a friend of hers named John Bailiff. And eventually the two of them become partners, and they have a daughter together named Rita. In 1994, On Our Backs was sold to a new publisher after they faced some financial issues. And the magazine itself folded in 1996.
I was just going to ask, I was like, did she and it?
I would kill to look at this magazine today. The archives, in fact, were eventually digitized and put online by a company called Reveal Digital, and it was part of their Independent Voices collection.
Okay.
But it was removed completely, scrubbed from the internet. The archives were. And I'm shocked by that. Okay. I had the debate with my wife about this, actually. Like, we talked about it a little bit. So here's why. There were women who were photographed in that magazine when they were in their 20s who would now be in their, by the time this is digitized and put on the internet, in their 50s and 60s, who have like lives and careers and children and grandchildren and whatever, who are like, when we took these photos, this is before the internet existed. I don't want my naked body on the internet in 2006.
Forever and ever and ever.
And that everybody will be able to see it. And that's what my grandchildren will look at, you know?
That's understandable.
But I also think like, no,
Then why
like
did you
these
do it
are
in the
not,
first
these are not
place?
like nude photos you sent to your partner. These are nude photos you took by a professional photographer for a magazine that went not just around the country, but was international. It had readership all across the world.
So do you think that's kind of like a false, like just a reason for it to be taken off the internet and it's not really true?
No, it is true. I mean, that
That
like
is what the women
they
said.
there were all of these statements put out by this company that had them up there. And eventually they were like, you know, we're going to take them down.
Okay.
And I just have personally, I have a problem with it because I think that I understand your personal concerns, but sorry. I
Like,
don't.
It's out there.
Yeah, like because you could still go to wherever they're archived. Like I'm sure they're archived. I know they're archived in the Lesbian Herstory archives, which I also visited in Brooklyn while we were there. I can walk in that house tomorrow if I want to and go pull out the archives and look at every single one of them. So what difference does it make if I can go to the Lesbian Herstory archives and look at them versus the archives online?
True.
And I could take photos at the Lesbian Herstory archives and keep those. Like now, you know, like I don't get like, sorry.
Just don't get it. Yeah.
Like I understand that you're
see-
saying like more people have access, but that was kind of the purpose of the magazine.
Yeah.
Was so that queer women had access.
Kind of like it defeats your whole goal of why you took that photo.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's why I'm like, no, you don't get to decide now that you're 55 and you've like gotten more conservative over the time that who you were at 20 doesn't exist anymore. Sorry. That's, I mean, I just personally, I have like a philosophical problem with it.
Got it.
So Susie continues to work as a sexpert and a writer. She co-wrote and starred in 2 plays. These are in the 90s, Girls Gone Bad and Knife, Paper, Scissors. She also worked as a screenwriter for several films, and she was a contributor and consultant on some Hollywood films. One of them was The Celluloid Closet, which I watched when I was probably 19, which was a documentary all about people closeted in Hollywood. And she also was a consultant on the film Bound.
I'd never seen that film.
What?
No.
Okay, well, it's a lesbian classic and you absolutely have to watch it.
Okay. I know now. Don't look at me like that.
God. In 2003, she wrote a book called Mommy's Little Girl on sex, motherhood, porn, and cherry pie. And in it, she confronted the disconnect that can happen when women become mothers and lose their sexual power in the eyes of society. You know how there's this like Madonna whore dichotomy?
Absolutely.
So you can be a whore when you're younger.
Once you become a mom, you got to button up that shirt.
Yeah.
I've said repeatedly, like throughout my time as a mother, it's like just because I had a kid doesn't mean I stopped existing.
Exactly.
And that's also involves my sex life.
Yeah. And being a sexual being.
And being a sexual person, yes.
So she confronts that in that book. And that's the interview I talked about earlier. In 2011, she published her memoir, which was called Big Sex, Little Death.
Ooh.
Which is such a great play because do you know what the little death is?
Yes, it is.
So it's this, it's really a literary theory, but beyond literary theory, but that the ejaculation is the little death. And the memoir covers her whole entire life and includes a lot of her personal ruminations on sex, queerness, motherhood, partnership, monogamy, non-monogamy, and so on. Since 2012, she has been an editor-at-large and executive producer at Audible Inc., which is owned by Amazon. They're the largest producer and distributor of audiobooks and audio material. She has a whole bunch of shows on there. Here are just a few of them. In Bed with Susie Bright, the Never Get Out of Bed collection, of which there are more than 500 episodes. The Secret Language of Sex, and my favorite, Mother-Daughter Sex Advice with Susie and Aretha Bright. So her daughter follows in her footsteps. Susie also still writes about queerness, motherhood, sexuality, and more on her blog, Susie Bright Blogs, though the last entry I saw was from February, so maybe she's either taking a break or has decided not to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to leave you with a couple of quotes from her. These are both from her 1994 book called Full Exposure, Opening Up to Sexual Creativity and Erotic Expression. When a young woman discovers her power, both sexual and intellectual, she unleashes her own voice, her own righteousness.
Tasty.
And this one, which I think is a really provocative thought. Sex is one of the few honest places inside us. It doesn't know how to lie, even if we change the story for the public.
Wow.
So one of the reasons why I was really interested in talking about her, and I don't know that we've talked about this much, is that I used to write a lesbian sex blog.
You told me about that.
Yeah, and I had it under a pseudonym, and I really enjoyed talking about it. And it was sort of semi-early days of the internet, and I found a decent-sized following pretty quickly. And I was approached by Good Vibrations.
What? You didn't tell me that.
Then I used to write for them.
Was that the reviews?
So, sometimes I did.
Okay.
No, for Good Vibrations, I wrote articles. So I would write about they found me and approached me and asked me if I would come and write for them.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And that was her.
Holy shit.
I basically worked for Susie Bright and I just didn't know.
You didn't know it at the time.
Yeah.
Holy crap.
I had no idea.
And how did you put that together? Was it when you were doing this research for this?
Yes. As soon as I saw Good Vibrations, I was like, holy shit. And everything, just FYI, if you're going to try to go down the rabbit hole and find my shit, one, I wrote it under a pseudonym, so good luck. And two, most of it, because it was quite a while ago, has been basically scrubbed off the internet. I can still find it because I have a magic touch. But y'all aren't going to be able to find that real easily. But I really, really, really wanted to do that as a career. And I mentioned my stepfather earlier, right? So here's what happened. Here's what had happened. So when I was writing my blog, obviously my wife knew. She was a consenting party in it. I wrote a lot about our sex life. I wrote about my relationships with other people. I wrote about, at the time, my wife and I were non-monogamous. So I talked a lot about that. And one day, in a very weird way that I will not reveal because it will reveal too much about her family, one of her family members found my blog, which I use that term loosely, and got figured out it was us and passed it on to other people in her family. And her family got really upset that I had this blog going. So this was a pretty large speed bump, but it was a speed bump. And I continued to write. And then my stepfather became unexpectedly very ill very quickly and died in 2 weeks. And I watched him die. And it literally halted my creativity. I couldn't write about anything. I could barely get out of bed. I could barely function in society. It was just a struggle for me for about, a full year that I just was basically a catatonic human being with no feelings. And so I couldn't write anything because I couldn't tap into any emotions, whatever they were. It also fucked up my sex life. And it took me basically until about 2 years ago for me to get back into writing at all. And he died in 2012.
Wow.
So it really halted my career because I was working for Good Vibrations. I had started to pick up other work. I was being contacted by people across the internet to write for them, to review sex toys for them. And I really liked what I was doing. And I really thought I was making a difference because I was talking about women's sexuality, queer women's sexuality, and in an unapologetic way. And,
which I think seriously has to be done more. Women should have to apologize for anything.
And you shouldn't have to be shy about your sexual preferences, things you
No.
enjoy. If it's between two consenting adults or more, as long as every
Yeah.
adult is consenting and an adult.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation with a couple of my female friends, and we were talking about negative sexual experiences, but like putting on that, like just letting that person that we were with finish so that we could just like go to sleep. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
and I did that for a short time when I first started having sex, and then I was like, fuck this. I want to show you what I want, and I'm going to ask for what I want because I really like sex and I enjoy sex, and I'm not going to excuse it away anymore. You know, I'm not going to be shy about my needs.
I'm really bummed that I let myself get so derailed. I wish I could go back in time. There are three big regrets in my life. One was marrying my ex-spouse, not because of him, but because it was the wrong decision for both of us and it hurt us a lot. Two, buying a house with him. That's for a totally different set of reasons involving the recession. And I would say four, actually. One was also quitting being a film major. I wish I could go back and change that. And then my last one is that I didn't continue writing. And specifically that I stopped writing about sex.
Yeah.
Because I think it is a really important part of humanity. Like, we're all humans. It's who we are, and we should have more honesty and openness and forgiveness.
And it is almost like a universal singular thing that we all do.
Absolutely. We have to.
We have to.
And so I was so drawn to her. And then when I got to the part where she ran
It's a sign.
the Good Vibrations, I was like, holy shit. Holy shit. So I'm not probably ever going to write about sex again because I have a job as a high school librarian now, and that would be a conflict of interest. You know, I would probably get fired. But just the idea of that could be Susie Bright's life and that she continues to do it to this day. I just loved her. I found her inspiring and interesting and complex and a fascinating speaker. So here's where I got my information. I used a little bit of Wikipedia just sort of as a skeleton of basic life events. But I really loved the interviews that I found with her. One of them was on Literary Mama. There was 2 great profiles on the magazine On Our Backs from Timeline and Aperture. And then I used Audible to include some clips from her. And there was another great interview with her from I think 1994 on the LA Times website. It was on their archives. And I used a Kirkus review of her memoir and her own blog.
Nice.
Susie Bright blog.
Susie Bright. Fascinating lady.
Yeah.
Yes. I like all the positiveness that is surrounded with that because I feel like women have so many things taken from us. And not only through sexual assault, but our very reproductive rights or how we're looked at or how we're portrayed in society. And it's just, I like that she is encouraging women to enjoy, because women's bodies are fucking amazing, to enjoy it and praise it and celebrate it and share it. Like, that is magic.
And she is very, even from the very start, is like, you know, everybody is, you know, can have pleasure and everybody can be attractive. And I mean, she was talking about stuff like that at a time when it was before this sort of body positive movement started. It was before there was a wide understanding of trans identities and stuff like that. So I thought that was really great. And it would break my fucking heart if I found out that in any way she was associated with sort of anti-transness. I was a little nervous about it just because of the time in which she was like coming up as a feminist thinker and writer and SEXPERT, because I have discovered that some of these women who came up in that time, who are still alive and still working in feminist thought, have anti-trans ideas. And that really, really, really upsets me. So I read through a pretty good chunk of her Twitter, and I could not find anything that pointed to that. But I just want to put a disclaimer out there that I do not know for sure. And I don't think there would be, because that seems very inconsistent and incongruous with what she has talked about.
Yeah.
But if there is something out there, I would be more than happy to read over it and include like a bonus where we talk about her potential thoughts. But I don't think it's out there. I looked. I tried.
And Amanda can find the bottom of the internet. She can dig.
Yeah, I remember that old commercial where the guy keeps clicking and clicking and clicking, and then the message comes up and says, "You've reached the end of the internet." I was kind of like
She's
that.
like that. Kind of like that. Bullshit.
Yeah, I do like to spend I can find things too.
We'll be talking about something and I'll be like, you know what? I should. She's like, found it. She's already got her phone out looking.
Oh, and I take it as a challenge if there's something that I cannot find.
Ooh.
So I will say that I said I couldn't find the digitized collection. That means I was trying to look for the entire archive. I did find lots of other photos. And if you just Google...
Your search history just got a little bit more fun.
You just Google on our backs and click on images, you'll find a plenty.
I know what I'm doing later.
Me too. Well, folks, I am glad you joined us today. I hope you enjoyed our talk about botanists and sexperts.
2 women who both did what they wanted to do with their lives.
Yes.
Yes.
Despite what anybody else thought.
Exactly.
We'd like to thank our editor, Lucas McIntyre,
Thank you,
and
Lucas.
Jennifer Finch, the writer of our theme song and member of L7. And please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. We always share portraits and other interesting material about the women we talk about, so you can take a look at them and see what they look like. And we also have been sharing just articles and inspirational stories that we come across of other women that we aren't talking about. We share them on our Instagram stories and Facebook stories. So if you see something like that and you think, hey, I think the ladies that I don't know her would like this, share
Send
it with
to
us.
Yeah.
We'll definitely put it up there. And we're all about promoting women and LGBTQ plus people who are doing just rad things, including art. We love art and music. So thank you for joining us today. Make sure you follow us, share, like, subscribe, tell your friends.
Yes.
We're gonna be launching a store sometime, hopefully before the end of the year.
Yeah.
Have a good have a good week, everybody.
Till next time. Forgot the rest of the stuff we said.
Lucas, you have to cut that out.
This is what happens when we don't follow the formula.
This is what happens when Rita starts it instead of Amanda.
I don't like it.